Today, 23rd of June, 2021. Karakia, whakatake te hau ki te uru, whakatake te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, ihi akia nā te atakura, ihi au, he huka, he hauhu, tihei, mauri ora. Let us affirm today that we as councillors will work together to serve the citizens of Selwyn District, to always use our gifts of understanding, courage, common sense, wisdom and integrity in all our discussions, dealings and decisions so that we may solve problems effectively. May we always recognise each other's values and opinions, be fair-minded and ready to listen to each other's point of view. In our dealings with each other, let us always be open to the truth of others and ready to seek agreement, slow to take offence and always prepared to forgive. May we always work to enhance the well-being of Selwyn District and its communities. We will. Kia ora, thank you. We've got a number of items on the agenda today and some big decisions at the end of a long process around the long-term plan decision making as well. But first of all, I'll just note we have no apologies. There's no extraordinary business that I've been made aware of other than one item from Councillor Alexander, which can be raised, Mark, after we have a presentation from the front. Any conflicts of interest that aren't previously noted, Councillor Miller?
Could be perceived conflict around the SOI for the trust, but I don't think there is, but I'll acknowledge it.
Okay, thank you. That's the SOI for the Central Plains Trust, Water Trust. Before we do the confirmation of minutes or move to anything else, we've asked Murray and Al to come and just give an update on the storm and weather events from a few weeks ago now and the ongoing work that's in our community for councillors and the public to understand where we're currently at. So Al Murray, I'll hand to you. Thank you for the ongoing contribution that you're making to bringing everything together and making sure that there's a really structured response for people so that no one is missed. And that good decisions can be made going forward, and particularly thanks to the welfare team who are thinking about the well-being of people in that district, as well as getting the roads and water and everything else that we need for life back up and going again. So I'll hand the floor to you, and we look forward to your report. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll just do a very brief update on where we're at with roading and water services. Obviously, 3 weeks into the event. On the roading side, by the end of the month, we will have spent about $1 million. That was initially just getting things open and safe, out of a estimated final bill of about $4 million. The major issues were major damage, obviously, around the foothills and the roads up particularly up the Coleridge Valley and the like. A lot of work still ongoing. So significant scar damage, quite a bit of culvert replacement. With bridging, the major focus is strengthening the White Cliff Bridge, and that's being assessed, I think it was yesterday, regarding whether it needs a more permanent weight restriction on it until permanent repairs can be undertaken. And we've lost a lot of metal off roads as well. So that's ongoing. All the hot spots are where you expect them to be. The Linden Road will probably be the last to be tidied up, mainly because it'll probably close itself because of snow during the winter anyway, so I'm expecting that. On the water services side, where, as I mentioned the last time, we had no problems with wastewater. With water supplies, all of our plants in the rural water schemes and in that top end of the catchment were affected to some degree. They're all operating now, but the recent rainfall over the weekend, of course, has raised turbidity again, so we've gone on to precautionary boil water notices for the 4 rural water supplies. The next step will be down the track, we'll be doing some options analysis about how we can actually, if we can, if it's really sensible to do so, to mitigate some of those turbidity issues, which is a bit challenging. And also, obviously following on from what will come out of Sunday's briefing in Springfield, will be whether we need to look at some longer term options for supply at Springfield. But other than that, the contractors are both working steadily through the work list. And if any councillors have any issues they would like to raise now, or particular issues, they would just get hold of us and we'll pass them on.
Just run over a couple of the figures. So we did over 580 rural assessments and urban assessments. So that was our community response teams, our response team, and the RST, Rural Support Trust, which is really, really good that we've been able to link up. It hasn't been the rural teams are doing one thing and we're doing another thing. We've decided in Selwyn that we'll link up. Still working with federated farmers, and they are trying to get as much information out of farming people at the moment about what damage, etc., that's happened on their farms, which is really, really important, especially going forward for recovery. 32 houses damaged, 12 uninhabitable, and 16 people are still being accommodated by us. We're working through with MBIE, with temporary housing. Most are in accommodation provided by us for that first 2 weeks, and then they go on to their insurance. Most people have $20,000 to $50,000 to spend on temporary accommodation if they have to be out of their homes. Rural Sport Trust, working closely with them and federated farmers. We have 2 farmer meetings coming up, one in White Cliffs, I think it is, or Glen Tunnel, and the other one is in Greendale. So trying to get farmers together in an afternoon and hear what they have to say, listen to their stories, and then see what we might need to do. Got a meeting with the Prime Minister tomorrow with Sam and David, looking at what's happening here, primarily Ashburton, I think it is. They've got more issues than us, but we're at that. Mayoral Relief Fund, so you would know that the Prime Minister announced $100,000 to 3 councils, and we get a third of that. So we're just working out with Sam where that will go, and more than likely it'll go to those who are directly affected, their homes and properties. So dispersed to them. From a recovery point of view, I'm engaging a contractor to help me who has worked with Naitahu before. I think it's really, really important we partner with Naitahu in this. This is not our gig and they just get us to come to the table. We really think that this is us together working to make sure that our whole of community recovers well from this. I'm into blue sky thinking, what could we do, should we do to make this a better place, more resilient for our communities? And I've previously said it, I am surely believe in i tangata. As Sam mentioned before, people are at the heart of this recovery. That's me.
Thank you. There's a couple of other meetings that are going on that have been touched on. So I've just been told that Wellington's going into level 2 around COVID tonight until midnight on Sunday. So whether the Prime Minister is now coming or not we'll know more over the next few hours. But we'll probably still end up meeting with Neil and Dan and Mayor of Timaru Nigel around thinking the engagement with ECAM particularly, and making sure that we are consistent in some of the messaging that we have. There's a letter that's been that we've put to the Minister for Civil Defence around thinking about the funding being inadequate for the need that we know that there is across all of our districts, and we would have been talking to the Prime Minister about that tomorrow, so we'll just see where that goes. There's a meeting in Springfield on Sunday that the community's asked me to chair, thinking about the future for the town and the things that can be done in the town, and we'll have our staff there and our councillors there, so if anyone else is interested in coming to that, you're welcome to. But it's an opportunity really for the community to have a chance to ask some questions. I've been hugely grateful for the work that's gone on, but they're just now thinking in that strategic space, where to from here. And they're also having an afternoon tea for the community, just as a thank you for those that have been involved in doing the good work. On the 1st of July, I've invited our local ECAN councillors, Ian and John Sinkle, as well as ECAN staff, to come on a trip around Selwyn, stopping at 5 points, firstly on top of State Highway 1, where the river often breaks to the north, to the south, sorry, towards Dunsandel, around Greendale, Glen Tunnel, Russell's Flat and Springfield, just to look at some key points, and obviously driving over a lot more of that. But this is a follow-up to the question that we've asked the last few annual plans of ECAN. Can you please look at river rating areas, the full catchment across Selwyn, not just up to the Ridgelands Road where they currently have it, so that they can be prepared to fund and do the work that we know is now required after an event like this, and for proactive work in particular, so that we don't end up with some of the damage that we think may have been able to be avoided had work been done beforehand. Councillors are invited, if you'd like to, on that. The invites haven't been sent yet, but you will receive one of those. Not wanting that trip to get bigger than it needs to be. There's quite a focused discussion around ECAN's responsibilities and thinking again pathways forward for that, and a couple of our staff will be there as well. And yeah, lastly, is has been said, the Mayoral Relief Fund, the 33,000, we've probably allocated just over 20,000 of that to affected people so far. If there are people that councillors are aware of where there's some special circumstances, please talk to either Al or myself about that. And Al, I was thinking too, just a message for the community, if there's still people who have been beavering away with their heads down, just thinking that's up to them to get on with it, who need some extra support that you're aware of, please make sure they're linked in to Al, because we don't want to see that happening when there is actually support available to try and help people. And lastly, you just mentioned, as a Task Force Green and MSD have mobilised a bit of work to help here as well. Do you know any more information on that you'd like to touch on?
Yes, so that is across the councils that are affected. That is being organised at the front end by conservation volunteers, which is a New Zealand organisation, so they are organising those people. And I sit on a steering committee just to look at where that might be utilised. It's primarily on farms to help farmers with fence clearing and those manual type of jobs, but they have also opened it up a little bit to helping communities, so community assets that may have been affected by the floods, cycleways, playgrounds, that sort of stuff in some areas.
It sort of follows on from what your meeting that you've suggested, which I think is a great initiative, Sam, but there was a farmer leader out of Mid-Canterbury, and I'm sure it applies here, who I'd asked Murray to perhaps respond, who was really concerned, acknowledging that it was a large rainfall event, whether we had a fundamental management issue around our rivers, particularly wanting to keep braided rivers within stop banks and the accumulated shingle that accumulates and in effect puts the river on top of the land, making the adjoining properties more at risk. Maybe it's too soon to answer that question, Murray, but is that something that you'll be taking to ECAN about that issue?
Yeah, exactly. The Canterbury Plains were built by years of deposition of gravel coming down rivers, and that'll continue on. And these braided rivers are floodplains, and they'll go where they want to go. And when people farm on the banks of those rivers, they're always vulnerable. The river will decide where it goes. So the problem is most of our assets are fixed in height, and the rivers aren't. So over time, it's a dynamic environment, and you've got to be able to adapt to it. That's one of those discussions with ECAN as to how much and how far you can actually go with river management, what's actually beneficial to do. If you dig a hole to clear out gravel, it fills up the next time it comes down. So I'm sure that will be the discussion next week, and I've just had a look at the river rating areas in Selwyn District, and there's actually nothing in the foothills and the upper catchments where we have problems. And that's the issue that we have, is where does that responsibility start and end? And it's not just rivers, it's that whole overland flow issue about where water goes when it just runs off property. And we had to end up with our stormwater, like around Hairata, we've ended up having to mitigate the impacts of that. And that's why we've had those discussions over the last few years. I'm sure they'll be ongoing for a wee bit longer.
It won't take much more time, but the river rating was one of the key concerns, is that whilst the adjoining properties may be river rated, the benefit is wider, particularly if it avoids it going through Springfield or Sheffield or Hororata or even Ralston or Christchurch. So there's a wider catchment benefits from that.
And as Sam mentioned, that's discussed in both submissions to the LTP, backwards and forwards, and that'll be part of the discussion.
Tēnā tātou, tēnā te mihi ki a koutou. Thank you very much both for your kōrero. A question for you, Murray. Is there an update regarding the bridge, Chamberlain's Ford Bridge, and for our, is it possible to expand on your kōrero with relationship with Naitahu and recovery?
Firstly, the Lesson Bridge at Chamberlain's Ford, temporary repairs, and it's permanent stuff still to be programmed. Obviously over the weekend we had another big fresh in the Southern, and we also had to go back into Cove Ford and try to get rid of the gravel underneath the Fords wet and crop. But you think it's actually had dropped away quite quickly and got the Ford open, but the catchment is so saturated that any rainfall now will bring it up, and it's just it's quite interesting to watch the rainfall and see how much the flows are. But a lot of those bridge repairs are temporary. It's not the greatest time of year to be trying to do permanent repairs anyway. So keep an eye on those. And there was a bit of concern on over the weekend about Chamberlain's Ford, but it was okay. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. I really don't have a question. I was going to thank, on behalf of the community, I want to thank you and your team for the work you did over that period and the work you're doing in the recovery. It's actually really good to see, and I think you're doing a great job.
I have two issues. Just following on from Grant, I understand ECAN's rating is while they actually do recover costs from the river rating structure, they also charge a percentage of a targeted rate across the whole of their ratepayers with regards to that public-private or benefit, who benefits the most versus who doesn't benefit the most. Don't think it's changed since I've been invited to a river rating meeting, so just want to highlight that. Thanks for offering to work with the farming landowners. Some of the concerns I've had from the lowland farmers, especially where they experienced some flooding that they hadn't had before, and that was around Coes Ford and Chamberlain's Ford. And some of them have actually questioned the native plantings that we've actually planted in our reserves, and understanding the modelling of the river with regards to those plantings and the types of plantings, and what analysis they're actually asking, what analysis was actually done in designing those plantings with regards to the river flows.
I just wonder on that, Deborah, thank you for the feedback. I'll raise that with ECAN, but it's probably just outside this briefing where we just want to focus on what the response to the storms has been. Cool, thank you. Murray?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. That was partially one of my questions too, to take through, because it is something that I think you need to raise. I've had a number of people ring me, as I'm sure as Deborah has as well. So yeah, if that could be raised, please, that would be beneficial. Couple of things really, Sam, just a clarification on the ECAN trip. Am I sort of reading between the lines or creating a new novel to say that too many cooks spoil the broth, and that it's probably better for us not to attend? A smaller number of key people having a discussion would be better than a bus full of councillors.
Yeah, that'll be great.
That judgment.
Yes. Yeah, but I don't want you to feel like you're excluded if you think that there's value in you coming.
No.
The conversation is really about our communication to ECAN, and that is easier done with 2 or 3 of us than it is with 10 of us. But if you want to come, the invitation is going to be sent.
I appreciate bluntness, Your Worship. Just very low level stuff here, but just a comment back on water allocation to the boil water areas, about the allocation of bottled water. Is that still available? And I'm assuming there's some sort of limits on. Just had a comment back from someone who said that they were rationed on the amount that they were given. for a 4-person family and felt that it probably wasn't realistic. Is there any comment there, or what's the ongoing discussion there?
I think slowly we've been withdrawing the bottled water and the tankers, because effectively all our water supplies are operating. And just yesterday, someone went back onto a precautionary boil water notice. So there is potable water there, and I don't really think we need to be supplementing. I can't comment on any rationing, but you've got to be realistic what you use it for.
Yeah, I guess the concern was that some was going to be retained and then sold afterwards. But, you know, that's anecdotal, Murray. So
yeah, thanks, Your Worship. Now, it's good to have this briefing, and I too would congratulate you as well for the work you've done. It's just one thing I was going to ask. Have we had a debrief as to what we did well, what we didn't do so well? I know that there's this crossover between ECAN and us, but talking about being blunt, sometimes we need to be blunt. Did we get it right? Is there anything that we need to mitigate to make sure it doesn't happen again? I'd certainly like to know that. I mean, it's all very well hearing the good stuff, but it's equally important that we hear the grim stuff as well. What did we get right? What did we get wrong?
So I was in Sheffield on Monday night talking to the CRT team and FENS and a few others, and the issue raised there was about sandbags and whether we got that right. It's probably something we didn't get right, but it is a vexed subject. Some councils do it, some councils make people pay for it. If I know my property floods, should I do it myself and take precautions? So I have managed to get 4,000 or 5,000 bags from a local seed company free of charge, and we have put sand in some places, and that was used over the weekend in Sheffield. We will put more bags in other strategic places, probably in Springfield and Sheffield. So we've got some in Waddington, and if we get another event, then we'll put sand in places and they can do their own sandbagging. That's where we've got to in there. We have debriefed, but that's been, the communication was the other thing. They wanted more communication back. So that's something which we'll try and rectify until one gets ready. It needs to be a two-way conversation, so that's a learning. And comms up in Castle Hill, we had some issues with that. And I think that has been rectified. The fibre didn't help. And I think Shane asked me about interaction with Naitahu. So we're working with Jamie Refute, who's the emergency manager there, just identifying the key people at the two Rurunanga that we're going to be dealing with, Tuahiwi and Taumata. And so we want to identify those people when I have the right conversations at the right time and front footer. So it's a partnership, not a stakeholder.
And thank you for that. Just picking up on this conversation around the trip with ECAN, I wonder whether we just narrow that focus down really clearly to be the two councillors from Melbourne, who is most of the area of the trip, and then if the councillors from Ellesmere would like to come for even just that first stop, since it's in the ward, we could just determine where that sits, and if the rest of the councillors are happy that those four can handle that bus trip, or less if required, we could work that way. Is it going to be okay with the rest of the council?
Well, I'd like to say, Sam, that I find that disappointing because we're district councillors, not ward councillors. I understand the priority should be for those ward councillors, but if they're not available, I'd like to suggest that the opportunity for other councillors to attend it should be there, because I've always found over the years I've been on council, it has been most informative and helpful to get out into the other wards and see the areas, particularly in times like these, to understand the issues.
Okay, thanks, Mark. We'll talk with those four initially and see where we go. Thank you. And Mark, do you want to raise your motion now, just because the volunteer effort that was coordinated under the Civil Defence Emergency kind of probably fits in a part of this?
Thank you. Councillors, you may or may not be aware that this is Volunteers Week. And that when reading the Selwyn Times yesterday, I noticed we were getting a bit of a stick over perhaps our reduction in the opportunity for volunteers as we review our community committee structure. But I think it's important that we acknowledge volunteers in our community. Without our volunteers, our district wouldn't function. And this is just simply a notice without motion that we acknowledge and thank all volunteers in Aotearoa for the important role volunteers play in making Selwyn a great place to live, work and play.
Thanks, Mark. Someone happy to second that? Thank you, Sophie. Is there any other discussion people would like to share? All those in favour say aye. Against? Declare it carried. Thanks, Mark. And thank you to presenters. It's appreciated. And if we could look to do this again in 2 weeks, I just think while there's things going on, there's changes, it would be good to have the next briefing in a couple of weeks' time as well. Thank you. We move now to confirmation of minutes, tab 6, page 6 as well, from the 9th of June meeting. There's a mover and seconder for that, Mugford and Alexander. Any discussion on those minutes? All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Declare it carried. There's 3 matters under investigation. Quarry setbacks coming back on July, some traffic stuff in today's agenda, and PC 69 later in July. The next segment of the meeting starts on page 42, and it's the adoption of policies, it's the adoption of the long-term plan, and it's the setting of rates. So, yeah, again, just want to acknowledge the work that's gone on behind the scenes over many months to get us to this point. I want to thank the community for the way that they entered into the submission process and helped us shape some decisions that did see particularly a new project added around Foster Park and thinking more clearly about what we do with water going forward and taking our time as we think about both the Darfield wastewater space and also chlorination and being prepared for that. Councillors, I just want to thank you for your consideration of the hearings that we sat through and listened and took notes on and then thought about and then discussed in the final decisions that are in the paper today. The first piece is around policies. It's a significance and engagement policy, the revenue and financing policy, the development contribution policy, rates remission policy, including Māori freehold land, and a rates postponement policy to begin with. And David moved Councillor Alexander and seconded Bland. And David, just invite you to say anything you'd like about those as well.
Yeah, no, look, I've got nothing to add. Again, just want to reiterate my thanks to everybody for participation in the shaping of these policies, which are live policies and under constant review. Mr. Mayor.
Great. Is there any further comments people would like to make or questions? Councillor Epiha, other policies? Yeah. No. All those, Councillor Epiha.
Tēnā rā tātou, kia ora, koro matua Sam, kai whakahaere David, kai kaurihira o Waikirikiri. I clearly remember during this consultation period or this deliberation period mentioning that, and you've mentioned it again, David, that the policies are live documents, they're living and they're open to amendment. I had discussed that consultation should not only be just with Naitahu but all Māori, and again it's I don't see it clearly reflected in here. So the way it reads, it says to me that even though the Act says that you must consult all Māori, you are consulting only with Naitahu, Kaitahu, because that's how it reads. And I'm only saying this for the protection of us as a council, because clearly it's out of step with the Act and the Te Tiriti. I wanted to state that, to make that very clear, because moving forward, I think we really need to be considering it. Slow to take offence and prepared to forgive. Well, yes, I am. I'm pointing that out. I understand that it's a living document, and I'd like to, we all today actually move that it be reflected in there in terms of a simple statement that says that all Māori will be consulted. At the bottom of the paragraph here, it says that...
what page, Shane?
Sorry, 52. Bottom of the page, it says previously adopted on policy Māori development capacity. Development of Māori capacity contribute to Council's decision-making processes to assist the Council in meeting its obligations under the Act, Section 81 of the Act. the policy is included in the long-term plan. Well, the policy is included in the long-term plan. It's included at page 433, but it doesn't mention all Māori. Again, it only mentions a portion, the rangatira of the rohe. I understand that. However, there are responsibilities, the council, and it should be to all Māori. Kia ora. Thank you.
Mr Mayor, my advice would, I acknowledge Councillor Epihar's comments. My advice would be to adopt in current form, because these are the policies that are included in our LTP and have been through an external process. And that was the reason I said was subject to regular review all the way through.
Yeah. Deborah.
Just one issue on page 7. In the public forum, it notes that I stepped away from the council table declaring an interest. Would it be helpful to actually put what that declared interest was, being a commissioner on the proposed district plan?
Page 7.
So
Happy to do that, Mr Mayor.
Folds
Thank you.
1, 2,
That
3.
can be noted for those that did at the time.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, we've had a mover and seconder. Kelvin, is there anything you'd like to say?
Largely as they've been discussed previously, what they are as discussed previously, and take Shane's point there, and we'll look at potentially how we may adjust that wording going forward, Shane.
Yeah, wording and practice, I guess. But, yeah. Okay, move to Alexander, seconded Bland. All those in favour say aye. Against? Declare it carried. Next is item 9. It's the adoption of the long-term plan. And the recommendation is that council adopt the long-term plan 21 through 31. Moved Councillor Lyle, seconded Councillor Deborah Hassan. Any comments that people would like to make?
If Mr Mayor, if I can open up, acknowledging firstly councillors, our community, but I want to acknowledge our staff who have, this has been their lifeblood for the best part of 12 months. Greg has been leading a project with a cast of many, many people, and if I start naming people, I'm going to leave somebody out. But I just want to acknowledge this is an organisational effort, a quality document that we have been able to produce, absolutely wrapped with the number of submissions that we got back from the community, the buy-in also to the consultation process and the support for the initiatives that we've put forward. Of course, it's incumbent on us now to make sure we deliver this plan within the time and within the budget, and I've every confidence that we will do that. Also happy to advise Mr Mayor and councillors that I have in front of me a signed audit report, which is to be put in here. There is one emphasis of matter that I am duty bound to read you, and it's in relationship to the storm, and it's not only going in ours but also the other affected councils under the heading of the extent of damage from significant flooding event during May 21 is uncertain. It says, without modifying our opinion, we draw attention to the disclosure on page 7 of the document, which outlines the significant flooding event that occurred during May 21 in the Canterbury region. Council has not made amendments to the forecasts contained in the plan because the extent of the damage to council's infrastructure and the estimated costs and timing of the remediation work that will be required are currently based on a preliminary estimate only. Should repair costs be much higher than expected, council will determine whether to amend its plan or include the information in the 22-23 annual plan. And just to reiterate, from a staff perspective, we acknowledge the extent of the damage, but we don't see this as going to impact on our programs, either capex or maintenance, for the 22-23 financial 21-22 financial year. Happy to answer questions, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Mark and Sophie.
Thank you. I'd like to also acknowledge those who contributed to the process, council and community staff and elected members. It's a big process, particularly for staff who begin it pretty much when we get elected. 18 months later, we are adopting the plan. It should be noted that there were amendments to the draft LTP. Those who claim that we never listen to submissions and then we simply do what we want are wrong. We did listen. We have made amendments based on our community feedback, and I think the process has been great. In the report on page 131, I think there could be a clarification. The paragraph that talks about the Pines pipeline says this first stage is likely to allow connections along the main street. Should probably mean the main street of Darfield, but it doesn't actually say which main street we're allowing connections along. It would be clearer if we said the main street of Darfield in that piece. And on page 158, I think there's a clarification. There's some misunderstanding in our community as to heritage funding, whether we agreed to a $4 million heritage funding or just the smaller $50,000 amount to allow further consultation in the next 12 months. And then it's subject to submissions on the next annual plan. So I think that's a useful clarification there, that we haven't agreed to $4 million of heritage funding. That's not what we've agreed. We've agreed that there will be a $50,000 fund which will help fund further consultation over the next 12 months.
Thanks, Mark. David, the change around Darfield, like the location piece, that doesn't materially change what's here, Kelvin?
No, it's in the commentary on the cover page of the report.
That's a report. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Sophie.
Yeah, just want to give another big thank you to everybody who participated, but particularly, I guess, so staff's been mentioned a bit as definitely the people who spoke at the hearings, because it is a wee bit of an intimidating thing. And we all know that we don't bite, but it's, it can be quite a next level sort of experience if you've never tried it before. And the only other comment that I'd make is on page 175, it looks like we've got social wellbeing or social capital a second time round instead of economic. But that's more like a possible typo thing. Yeah. Thank you very much to everybody.
Great, we'll look at that, Sophie, 175. Shane.
Kia ora. Also concur with my colleagues' comments. Thank you very much, everybody. Page 131, Leaston Library, place over the facility is now planned to take place over the period 23 to 25. Support that. But on page 155 of the long-term plan, it actually takes it out to 25. There's an inconsistency there between those notes. And sorry, I'll just get to 155. 22, 23 in the big decision in the long-term plan, and then the now notes it's 23, 25.
One's construction and one's feasibility and design. Yeah.
Yes, okay. Thank you. My next point is 132, allocation of funds for groups of interest, and we had agreed the Runanga there is down as one of those groups. And forgive me if I haven't actually picked up on it, but we had discussed what that funding was to be used for, I guess, with each of these groups, really. And if there's a clarification of that, please.
Yeah, I can do that. So what we agreed is to provide 50K to support capacity building between Council and Taumutu to allow us to keep our obligations under the LGA. When we met with their executive 2 Mondays ago, representatives from Taumutu executive agreed in principle that they wish to continue engaging in that conversation. And it's now incumbent on myself to arrange the next meeting or series of meetings to enable that discussion to take place, and the outcomes will be reported back for adoption by Council at a subsequent date.
And as Council had requested, it was clearly articulated that it's not for Marae running costs, but for capacity and partnership with us. Grant.
Some direction from the Mayor, I guess, is that the ratepayers watching this all wanting to understand how we come to the conclusions we did. Clearly, we were not united on some decisions, although there was a vote. Are we relying on the members of the public reviewing those minutes, or do you wish us to restate our opposition? Or, I mean, that could take all day if we restate our positions, I feel. But I think it's worthwhile making a statement to the effect that not all decisions were universally approved, and there was reasonably solid debate because, you know, as I said, I clearly have some issues with. I find myself in Craig Watson's position of a couple of years ago, where I'm going to have to approve an LTP, which fundamentally some portions of it I don't agree with. So that's where we are. So are you able to provide context for that?
Yeah, I think that there's the give and take of 12 of us sitting around the table. I hope that is captured in the notes from the deliberation meetings that we had, and would direct people that want to understand any particular points that any councillors made on some of those things to refer to those minutes. If there's other things you particularly would like to highlight today, you're welcome to do that. But I don't want a list of the top 100 things you agree and disagree with. I don't want to go through and
for the meeting to re-go over. But you know, as I said, I'm in that position where I'm voting in favour of the LTP, but some portions of it I'm not in favour of. And that's, I guess all councillors are in a similar position today. Of course. Yes. Secondary question is really a mechanical issue, is that we've got a list of strategic assets, and given the Three Waters review, obviously our Three Waters assets are still listed as strategic. Just to reiterate to our community that should Three Waters review become fact, that we will indeed need to go out to our community and consult on whether we would join, or has that been pushed to the side, or the central government said there won't be a need for us to consult as a strategic asset?
At the moment, the government's plan is to tell us end of this month exactly where we're going to sit as far as where the entity goes, and that means all councils lose all of their water assets into these multi-regional entities, and the obligation to consult is on us should we wish to do something different, whether that's work with a few neighbours, work with a lot of neighbours, or go it alone and keep the status quo. So we don't need to consult if in the end we think that the proposal has merit and we stay in, but there will be further discussion.
So the government will legislate that there's not a requirement for consultation to dispose of strategic assets. That will be enacted as part of the legislation.
It is bespoke legislation for the whole change. Yep.
I just think it's worthwhile while I'm on the point, because clearly there's a massive change of ownership, particularly inherent in that, and what that might look like for our communities. And if you look at today's agenda, particularly around the work that our staff have put into the 30-year infrastructure strategy and all the background work behind it, it would tend to suggest that there is a great deal of planning going on in Selwyn, and there is a great deal of viability in our system. And what I see being promoted through the media is a whitewash or a greenwash that council or infrastructure is in a poor state and it's in a really run down state, and we should amalgamate as of right. And that to me doesn't seem to be an equitable outcome from the advertising campaign, what I've seen so far. It certainly presents a very biased picture of what infrastructure in council looks like.
There's a couple of points that I've just raised around an email that Susan Freeman-Green, the Chief Executive of LGNZ, has sent yesterday around this discussion for Three Waters. There's a Zoom today which we made available to councillors around some of the things that they have noted. But policy decisions, the proposed number of entities, boundaries, governance arrangements, Māori rights and interests, local voice will be announced at the end of the month, so that's probably during the 30th. Individual council dashboards and data will be released at the same time, so again probably 30th of June. Note the dashboards will not include the whole picture, so there will be some gaps. The information on 30th of June will not include the package being wrapped around the policy decisions, nor will it include the government's thinking around processes around decision making and next steps. The package is part of the live optimisation discussions we're having with DIA right now, so it's work in progress. The government's thinking around next process steps are live in the cabinet right now, and announcements about the package, which is the funding, what the proposal actually looks like, and an indication of what those next steps is due mid to late July. So we're still in that waiting phase, and it's still going to come over at least 2 more drops of information for us.
And if I reiterated in public that the statements out of central government have always said that this would be voluntary, and at all times our joining of it would be voluntary, and we haven't heard any different from central government and we would like to hold them to account on that.
And for those that attended the meeting with Naitahu last week, she didn't change from it being voluntary, but it was acknowledged that the decision is going to be Cabinet's in the end, not the Minister's. And so we'll find out when that comes through. Thanks, Grant. Jenny and Murray.
Thank you, Sam. On page 153, the wastewater system in Darfield and Kuwi, it just doesn't mention when it's going to be connected to Kuwi. People are going to say it's going to Darfield, when's it coming to Kuwi, and I can't, whether it should have Darfield and Kuwi in that connection time in stage 1, I think just needs to be highlighted if that's what the decision was.
Jenny, you're focused on the new development areas rather than it saying coming to the township, because the existing townships we've sort of put back, and we'll do the review with ECAN, look at current septic tank conditions, look at when consents run for, and think about our timing there. But are you suggesting it's those types of timing, or is this straight for when a new development occurs? And we've mentioned here for Darfield that will occur straight away, but the question, are you asking, is that Darfield and Kuwi?
Yes.
Sorry?
Just looking at the first sentence, which says complete the pipeline to the Pines and require all new development to connect immediately. That is Darfield and Kuwi, for understanding. Immediately is obviously dependent on the pipeline being built. So the definition of immediately could be quite subjective. But we are working through with developers of both towns to work out what their staging is and what we can actually provide. So it's a bit of an ongoing discussion.
Is there value in saying as soon as available rather than immediately, with the intention of it is now, the timing's now, without getting ourselves into a space of over-promising something that can't be delivered? I don't know whether that changes what's written here in the intent, but I don't want to raise expectation in the community, because you're right, it's not tomorrow if they're ready to go.
Preference is not to make changes to the document. We're trying to adopt it today. Changes will delay the process. We'll need to go back to the auditors even with wording changes.
Okay. So if the minutes of this meeting can note the explanation that we've got and councillors are aware of where that discussion sits. Great. Murray.
Thanks, Sam. Just quickly, firstly, congrats to staff and councillors for the whole process and submitters. Made more difficult, David, by a hot review at the end of the process as well, which didn't aid brevity at all. I guess also reflecting, thanks, Mark, for raising the heritage thing. I know I've had comment on that too, so thanks for raising that. Grant's comment around, we won't all agree on every aspect of a long-term plan, and hopefully we'll vote and pass this today as we need to meet time constraints and legal obligations. But essentially, this is democracy at work, negotiated, compromised outcome, and hopefully that reflects the community we live in. We represent different aspects of community, and we'll have differing views, but we've got collective responsibility, as I said. And just finally, I guess, David, it's probably, we've never had this number of submissions and this amount of workload, and reflect on the size of the documents we had to read in a 2-week process, as well as a council meeting in the midst of that as well. And I'm just wondering whether perhaps it's timely for us just to have a wee bit of a review of our timeframes, and perhaps have a week between sitting down and the hearings, and then immediately a week later do deliberations. And I think not just for councillors, but especially for staff compiling that as well. I just think that the enormity of those documents this time probably made it difficult to do true justice to it. So perhaps just time to reflect. We may not be as successful again. Perhaps we shouldn't make such a good job of the consultation document. Anyway,
Yeah.
just my thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah, no, look, I note those comments. We did succeed, but we put ourselves under a lot of pressure to do so. And one of the debrief things is around the timing, starting time, consultation period, then the deliberations period before adoption.
So I echo Murray's comments as well, because the issue that we've got, which was a good one, is that our district is changing so much. So with our LTPs, it's not really just a review, it's almost starting looking at everything again. So bearing in mind that, I mean, potentially with all, the number of plan changes that come in, and our district is getting even bigger. So I think it is, I second Murray that it's really important that we look at this review, because, I mean, chances are we'll be even more again for the next LTP. And it's good to have our processes in place, so make it easier, I suppose, for everyone going through that process.
Schedule that for August is probably going to be to find a Wednesday we can do that properly. So thank you for those comments. Been moved and seconded by Alexander and Hassan. All those in favour say aye. Against? Declare it carried. Well done. The next item is number 10, setting of rates for the year 1st of July 2021 through 30th of June 2022. And there's, I think, 1 through 17 different parts to the motion there. Kelvin, is there anything you'd like to add to introduce this report?
No, nothing. It's just really a legislative process that we go through. This has been reviewed, peer reviewed by our lawyers, and really an extraction from the LTP process.
Thank you. Deborah.
Yes, I've got a query, and it's on page 563, and it's to do with the sewage loan targeted rates. And I go down to E and F, and I see that we have a sewage loan targeted rate on Southbridge Sewage Scheme area and within the Naitahu Sewage Scheme area. Are they the only two that we actually have in our sewage scheme area that are left?
Yeah, that's correct.
Cool. Mover and seconder for these reports. Bob, seconded. Sophie. Any further discussion? Grant.
I would feel I'd be remiss in my role if I didn't bring up again about the UAGC. I know we're very close to the limit, but the costs of growth, in my view, are not clearly being reflected on the growth community, particularly around our roading infrastructure. The extravagant growth, and if you extrapolate it out across our community, you would see that, in particular, when you talk about roundabouts, $5 million goes a long way in putting running metal on roads. And so I still support seeing our UAGC, we've got 600,000 of capacity there left at the moment, and being as high as possible, because it seems inequitable that our general rate is bearing the brunt of growth on its own.
Thanks for those comments, Brad.
Sam,
Mark?
I think that it should be noted that individual general rate payers, particularly those with large properties, are paying high general rates. But actually, in our last two valuations of the district, the capital value of our urban and our rural areas, excluding lifestyle, were approximately equal. And with our continued growth, the capital value of our urban areas will actually be higher than our rural. So the argument that the UAGC unfairly penalises the rural might be true on individual properties, but isn't true on sectors of our community. The capital value of our urban areas is in fact increasing much faster as farmland is turned into housing. And so in fact our urban areas are paying a higher portion of the general rate across the district.
Thanks, Mark. I guess we're thinking forward to next year, we've already intimated that there's a heritage rate likely to be at least discussed through this year and potentially levied next year. And so the capacity that's there will be required for some of that discussion, regardless of whether we end up at $20 or not. And as a council, we have determined that we should sit close to the top end of that. So acknowledge that there's the gap that you've identified there, Grant, A lot of other councils are sitting at 5 or 6%. AURGC's 29 point something, and with 30 being the absolute limit.
We are going to be further challenged though with NZTA or Waka Kotahi as it's now known not funding us fully. We have a shortfall in our roading budget as we speak. So unless we're prepared to wind back our expenditure on our roading program, we're going to have further pressure on our general rate as well.
Moved Bob and Sophie. All those in favour say aye. Against? Declare it carried. Page 588 is the Chief Executive's report. David.
Mr Mayor, councillors, thank you. A lot of these are for information only, but first item, Infometrics quarterly monitor for the March 21 quarter, and for the benefit of those listening in, a couple of the key highlights. Council's economy expanded by 1.3% over the year to March 21. Quarterly growth has tailed off a wee bit in the March quarter. Employment of Selwyn residents growing strongly, but naturally starting to plateau as well. Business confidence appears to be higher than a number around the country. Strong growing population enables strong consumer spending growth, up 3.4% in the March quarter, compared interestingly to a 3.8% decline nationally during the same period. And I've attached the Infometrics document to my monthly report. Second item, very proud to announce, this is a bit of a Skype session, I guess, really. Very proud to announce that we are again a finalist in an award. You asked me about 6 months ago, why aren't we putting entries into these awards, because we've got some pretty good things. Well, we did, Taituara, and we won, as you well know. We now have the customer service experience project, also a finalist in the LGNZ awards this year, and they'll be announced in Blenheim on Friday the 16th of July. Spent a wee bit of time talking, and Mr Mayor, you may wish to add some comments to this as well. The potential legislative impact, 3 major things at the moment, 3 waters, which we've just heard further information is going to be circulated around the end of June. We will be doing very in-depth analysis in terms of comparing the government information with our own LTP, talking about investment that we have made over a period of time in our 3 waters infrastructure, and importantly, the investment that we are planning to make in the next 10 years. The RMA review, and I've made a comment before that this piece of legislation is, it was first enacted in 1991, so 30 years on, it's well due for a review. We had the benefit at the rural and provincial meeting of hearing from Minister Parker, who is in his capacity as Minister for the Environment leading this review. One of the key messages that we gave is that it would be opportune for you, Minister, and your officials to come and talk directly to us at local council level, or certainly at zone level, just to get a wee bit more appreciation of some of our localised issues and how they may morph into more centralised planning approaches. And the third one is the future for local government. You have all been invited to a workshop on Friday week to consider the opportunities for local government. There is a committee led by former CE of Waimakariri, Jim Palmer, who are meeting with councils and groups around the country. Interestingly, this is a 30-year focus that they're taking, and also talking about some of the things that we could be doing that central government are currently doing at the moment. So look forward to input from everybody on the 2nd of July, and then subsequently into the reports that come out from Jim Palmer's working group. Last week, Thursday and Friday, in fact 2 weeks ago, Thursday and Friday, the Mayor, Councillor McGuinness and myself had the opportunity to attend the rural and provincial meeting. There have been some notes circulated, but the key address was really the David Parker one on RMA, and it ended up being 2 conversations. Good presentations from the Chair and CE of Local Government New Zealand, talking not exclusively but predominantly about those 3 work items that I just spoke about, and a range of other presentations from a number of speakers. Is there anything that you want to
Yeah, just on the David Parker piece, he was asked about whether or not, Sophie, you might want to comment as well, the makeup of the committees for thinking about what regional planning might look like. And it was really the answer was a sideline of local government, a sidelining, should I say, where he saw relatively small panels with a couple of experts, someone from regional council, someone from a TA, and a couple of Mrt Renewal representatives. A panel of 6 making decisions for the whole region, whereas at the moment, as you know, we have a pretty deep understanding of our own district plan, understanding what our community's needs look like, and have got a number of our own councillors sitting on that review going on at the moment. So yeah, it's going to be challenging thinking about how that change comes about and what the final proposals look like. Sophie, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, it was a really interesting couple of days. There was even the presentation from Stats NZ was quite interesting. They're definitely planning ahead for the census, which is good news because the last one didn't really deliver the information that was needed. MHUD spoke. They were, that was quite interesting around Kaingora and infrastructure fund and that sort of thing. So I'm just flicking through my wee notes. One interesting one as well at the end was Ruapehu District Council they did a wee presentation on some wellbeing assessment work that they'd done, which was a wee bit different to just looking at the normal stats that were available and going to different communities and talking through their stories. And we've spoken a lot about stories today with regard to the flooding and finding out more about, deeper stuff, not just your numbers. And it was just interesting to see the amount of information that they found that hadn't been available before, and it has actually fed quite significantly into their planning. The information that they've discovered around accessibility of health and connectivity and everything else there. So it might be interesting to look into that more for us at some point too.
Thanks. And one of the things that was talked about there and has come up again recently is the $1 billion in the Housing Acceleration Fund that continues to be spoken about. And I think we need to think about our opportunity to touch in on that. It's been repeated that it's not for projects that would be funded otherwise. But it's hard to know how you get something that has not been planned into a form that can be submitted on without there being some form of pre-arranged funding. I think the one thing,
Aquatic Centre.
Yeah, I think the one thing that sits out for us is a key piece of funding that's Broadlands Drive that sits through right beside Help It, which we've been talking about anyway. Regardless of what the outcome is for the Help It discussion, Broadlands Drive needs to be completed. And would mean that it would open up the opportunity for housing acceleration in the middle of Rolleston, fastest growing town in the place. So thinking about how we submit, or David, what sort of framework we could put around Selwyn's submission to the Housing Acceleration Fund, because there'll be other things as well, and how we might consider carefully what we put forward, but also when we tried to follow the rules and meet what was clearly written down as the government's expectations around shovel-ready projects after COVID, we met all the criteria and were turned away, and yet many projects that did not meet any criteria found their way in. So in the end, I think it's actually important that we identify where we believe the needs are, and then let those making the decisions do that refining work. But that's one that stands out to me, and David, appreciate you thinking about how that process might look and how we get our application in. Thanks, Sophie.
Thanks, Sophie. Mr. Mayor, just a couple of other comments I would add. Biodiversity, there was an acknowledgement that we need a better structure to manage this activity. Discuss the NPS on Indigenous biodiversity, which they're looking to gazette, they being central government are looking to gazette later this year. Presentation around the Water Corporation and talked about pricing equity and potentially how that will provide additional revenue. The census presentation that Sophie talked about was really interesting, and it was an admission up front that there simply weren't enough bodies involved in the process last year. And I think it was at about 4,500 people they said that they're going to have engaged this year. It's going to be a significant number, I think, up from 1,500 last year, but they're saying that up to 50% of people will receive paper forms this time, as opposed to just do it on your keyboard. And also significant emphasis on knocking on doors to collect information. We also had a really good presentation from Dr. Ashley about COVID. He was talking about how to map out our re-engagement with the rest of the world, touched on freighting issues and supply chain stuff, the vaccination program obviously, and addressed the reliability of supplies, and concluded by saying that the priority is still to keep the virus out of New Zealand. So really good 2 days actually. Excuse me, learned a lot of new information. I've also just put some information in there for public record around visitor attendance at the Selwyn Sports Centre, over 36,000 people in the first month, which is absolutely staggering, and those numbers are being maintained as we move into the second month. And finally, Selwyn Aquatic Centre, so the new pool has been opened and is in use. It's a new 10-lane, 25-metre pool. Once that has been opened for at least 2 weeks, we're then closing what has up to this point been the main pool for maintenance, which includes reducing the depth of that pool. Happy to answer any questions, Mr. Mayor, on content of that report.
No questions. Move on, Seth.
I just wasn't sure if anyone else wanted to go first. 2 things. Looking at the Infometrics report, particularly around Selwyn, yesterday we were lucky enough to attend a council-generated tourism event, which was supporting our wonderful tourism operators in Selwyn. But the interesting thing that this Infometrics report tells us is that tourism expenditure in Selwyn is roughly between 40 and 60 million annually, whereas our agricultural industry, and particularly dairy, is 560, half a billion, plus the other agricultural add-ons. I just wonder whether sometimes we were focusing our energies on area of least reward, although it's great to help our tourism industry, particularly in our science and tech and agriculture, which is the heartland of our district here. What focus do we put on that, and do we put enough into actually supporting where we're making the most of our income? Particularly when you think of Lincoln University, I think we talked about the Innovation Hub, and I'm not sure where the new Tamutu land acquisition sits and whether there will be further requirements around our own planning, and if it has become potentially space launch site. Is that within Selwyn, or is that it's in Christchurch? Can't we move the boundary? But those sort of things, particularly on Lincoln University, I think they are very keen for us to help them.
Thanks, Grant. And I think that needs to be part of, well, it is part of the draft KPIs that have been circulated, thinking about economic development in Selwyn, and for us as a council, how we actually start looking a bit broader about our involvement in economic development. So you'll be interested when we get to that discussion. Malcolm, do you have a question? No? Oh, move. Malcolm, seconded. Nicole. All those in favour say aye. Against? Declare it carried. Next we have the representation review, preliminary consultation, and Stephen is here, and also there'll be some comments from the chair. Mark, I don't know which of you would like to go first. Great, Stephen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and councillors. The report is for your information. The subcommittee wanted to make sure that the full council was kept updated and briefed on the progress of the representation review process. So this report is an overview of work to date and the current status of the process. And I know a number of councillors have sat in from time to time and observed some elements of the representation review subcommittee meetings. This is quite an important stage because we are about to go out for our preliminary consultation, which is not the formal consultation on our initial proposal, but is a chance to gauge the public's view on the options that have come through the process, which the subcommittee has been working on over the past 6 months, to refine those down to a workable range of options which meet the requirements of the Act around fair and effective representation, and to meet the numerical formula that are set out in the Act, so that we are ensuring that fair and effective representation is met. So the options that are set out in the appendix to this report are those that we will just seek some general feedback from the community on, and as noted in the report, that feedback will come back to the subcommittee, which will then determine an option to be taken out for our initial proposal, which is the formal consultation step,
and that will go to the council for its approval in August. The subcommittee did meet this morning and made a few changes or adjustments to the proposed consultation material. They're not of a material nature in terms of the actual scenarios and the ward boundaries and numbers of councillors, but just in the way we frame the questions, which will go out for consultation. And Mark may wish to make some comment on those adjustments that have been discussed this morning.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank the committee members for their work so far. The one thing that we always know in Selwyn, the only constant is change. That our current representation review, our current structure of wards and the number of councillors cannot continue. We have to change to represent our growth. And we have 4 options in front of us with 10, 9 and 7 councillors and a variety of different ward configurations. The committee decided to separate the issue of number of councillors and ward structure from that of community boards. So that in the consultation, we will be asking our community, in the preliminary consultation, how many wards do you want? How many councillors do you want from these 4 options? Which is your preferred option? And then after that, we'll be saying, do you think that your preferred option needs a community board? Would you like to see a community board in your ward? There are minor adjustments to the map, particularly on 2 and 3 to the Malvern Springs Ellesmere boundary, but it's not, as Stephen has noted, it's not material. So this is the preliminary consultation. We'll be taking 5 meetings, 1 in each ward, plus an extra one in West Melton, as they'll be in the nature of a drop-in clinic. An extra meeting was deemed worthy for West Melton because in most of these options, West Melton Township and or its rural area are affected in changing ward boundaries more than any other of our communities. So it gives them a chance to question and understand and perhaps improve their feedback. The options 2 and 3 with the combined Springs Ellesmere ward actually has some historical basis because it goes almost back to the Springs County, which existed prior to the 1989 amalgamation. So it's not unique. It's not new to propose that those 2 wards be merged. It actually has some historical basis. So I commend this to you, councillors, and hope that if you have any questions, you can approach us or your councillor who is on the committee to ask, and encourage our community over the next month to read this, to think about it and indicate their options. From that, we come back to council at the end of August with a preferred option, which goes out for the formal consultation, becomes council's option for the next 2 elections. One other certain thing is that this, whatever structure we determine, will need to be reviewed in 6 years' time, because the continued strong growth in our eastern part of our district will make whatever structure we choose now will need change in the future. So we can focus on a structure that works for us for the next 6 years, knowing that in 6 years' time, it'll be an entirely different question for an entirely different council if, with the local government reforms, the Selwyn district exists at all in 6 years. So I'll be happy to move the recommendation.
Thanks, Mark. Seconder. Thank you, Jeff. Any questions that people have of this report? No? All those in favour say aye. Against? Declare it carried. Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Mark. The next item is 13, Chief Executive's Report, Audit and Risk Subcommittee.
Okay,
Moved, Councillor Murray Lemon.
Point of order, Your Worship. Could I move that this be moved into in committee? It seems that inevitably in the course of discussion we may discuss the merits of a private person.
You can do. It's basically about the process though. It's not around an individual, because the Audit and Risk Committee has the ability to elect its own chair. We're only talking about process today, not individuals.
Grant?
Well, you have my view. I think it's better to be in committee personally.
How do the rest of the committee feel about it?
I would support Councillor Miller.
Great. Let's just
I think I would too, actually.
let's just move it there, and then it's yep. Okay, thank you. We'll leave that for now and come back to that in PX. Tab 14 is our CCO Statement of Intent. For Sycon, Central Plains Water Trust, Orion, and Selwyn District Charitable Trust.
I'll do this one.
There we go. Councillor Lemon and a seconder. Bob, any discussion?
These have all previously been before Audit and Risk and are signed off.
Yeah, Murray.
Yeah, just it's the old chestnut around borrowing, but pay dividends, which I think we'll raise when we get a presentation from Orion. So yeah, just note that. Yeah.
Thank you. All those in favour say aye. Against? Declare it carried. Thank you. Tab 15, page 677 is Transportation Monthly Update. Murray, Andrew. Andrew, welcome. We'll start with you, and Mark can go second this time. That's right, you can go first, and Mark can join in later.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon. From my perspective, obviously the big item sitting in my section of the report is around the indicative funding approval by the agency on our maintenance renewal program for the next 3 years. So I've outlined there all the sort of specific aspects to that, just as a quick summary. Our current 3-year program for maintenance renewals is around $40 million for the 3 years. What has been approved by the agency is in the order of 44.4 million, and we had requested to the agency a program of around 52 million. So what does this mean? It means that generally the district received a 10% increase in our funding compared to current levels. This is over the Canterbury average of around 8%. In Appendix A to this report, you'll see a breakdown of how all the other councils around the region compare, excluding Christchurch City, which is obviously a completely different sort of situation compared to provincial councils such as ourselves. The other way of looking at it is that 85% of our requested program was funded, and that we, in monetary terms, received the largest increase of around 3.9 million over the 3 years. The sort of the highlights and the lowlights, if you want to put it that way, of the situation is that we received a 20% increase within that overall increase of seal pavement maintenance. So that's gone from around 6.6 million to 8 million, which is relatively significant. We have had some increase in our seal road resurfacing budget, around a 15% increase from 9.6 million to 11 million, which, as I said there, is helpful. Basically, our road rehabilitation budgets and unsealed maintenance budgets have stayed about the same. And we got a fairly good increase in our traffic services renewals budgets of traffic signs, markings, etc. So in some respects, this is not a surprise in terms of where we've ended up. And the fact that, if you remember rightly, I've been telling you for quite a long time, and also Wakatahahi, in the fact that they were having significant national funding constraint problems, and that don't expect anything spectacular. I think on the basis, when you look at it in regards to all what the councils have received over the region, they've all received an increase of some sort. Some a little bit higher, some a bit lower, and what have you. So in actual fact, we could have been staring down the barrel of the fact that we could have received no funding increase. And the fact that generally everybody has received an increase of some sort is, I think, a compliment to Wakatahahi that they've achieved that. All right, to be blunt, it's not everything that we asked for, and not everything necessarily, in terms of what we deserve. We actually probably do deserve more in regards to the issues that we face in the district in regards to our high growth rates, etc. but we have to be realistic. I think the big point about this is that we have been prudent in our planning for this contingency, or for putting in place a contingency to handle this. And that was around putting in the extra $1 million of direct funding into the LTP to supplement our road maintenance renewal activities. And also the discussions that we've been having internally, and has now been reflected in your adoption of the LTP, that we have retained the local share of our funding into our programs that the NZTA are not funding, if that makes sense. So for simple terms is that we can achieve 49% our funding assistance rate of the work that we would normally have done if it achieved NZTA funding. So we've got the ability to shuffle some of this funding around to be able to supplement our maintenance renewal programs going forward, which is around equivalent $2.3 million a year. So that's the 1 million that we've already allocated, plus the retaining in our budgets the funding that our funding share that NZTA is not subsidising. So that gives us some options. And I think on that basis, we're looking pretty comfortable in terms of being able to come up with a program that can hopefully address some of the issues that we have, some of the issues that you've already, you quite often highlight in terms of being able to manage the situation. So in all, I think it's a pretty good result on the basis that we've been quite prudent and done some good planning to cater for this sort of eventuality. So that would be sort of my general comments at this point. I also remind the council that we're still waiting for the agency to go through and approve all the CapEx program. So that's low cost, low risk, and major projects, for instance, like the further Prebbleton intersection upgrades. So we're still waiting for that. I believe that went to the NZTA board a couple of weeks ago, and we're still waiting for the handle to be turned and see what comes out the other end from their perspective in regards to how that funding may work over the region and obviously nationally. I have no indication at this point where we sit or where anybody sits. All I can say is that the emphasis still is on the agency to basically support road to zero programs, i.e. road safety. And I suspect that will be their first priority in terms of prioritisation funding for anybody's programs going forward.
To finish your report, or if that is the end, then we'll come to questions to you and then move on to Mark's part of things around operations.
Yep, I'll just catch you up on a couple of other things. I think the other interesting one there's been quite a bit of work on is the Rolleston State Highway 1 Access NZ Up project. As I've said in there, there's been a lot of work that's going on with technical workshops. That has included the likes of Kiwi Rail in terms of trying to establish options around where we want to go with this. I think the options are fairly clear, but they have to go through the process to basically dot the I's and cross the T's on the business case. The work that I've been doing with them directly has been very much making sure they seize any and all opportunities to ensure that we don't get blocked through a delay in action in regards to some of the property that's been developed in these areas of interest, because as you know, one day there's an empty lot and the next day something's being built on, and there's a few of those situations going on that could be impacting these projects that we have to be really careful of, and in terms of making sure we don't lose opportunities that may be difficult to solve later. So that's okay, and basically the idea is that consultation will go out on that program, all those options in mid-July at this point, whether it's either the 13th or the 20th of July. We're not 100% sure yet on which one will work out, but that's what we're generally aiming for. And probably a couple of other ones in regards to, you had the presentation on the Mrt Interim Report. The finalisation of that report has occurred. That is going to CAG very shortly, and then it will be for endorsement to then go to the Greater Christchurch Partnership on the, I believe, it's the 9th of July. So essentially when the agenda goes out, that agenda will include the final Mrt Interim Report, and at that point it will become public. And so we are expecting a series of questions that are going to come from that, from whoever. There's already been Laguna requests to the likes of ECAN and things like that to release information sooner rather than later, and so that's a process they're trying to manage at the moment as well. And probably the only other one is, a couple other ones, is that in terms of council requests, as we talked about before in the last meeting or a couple of meetings ago, we have now actually sent a letter to Wakatahahi's Chief Executive requesting a state highway review for the district. So that's attached as Appendix B. And also just in there, the upgrade of that street lighting on Lincoln Rolleston Road that came from the LTP deliberations. And one other final thing, which didn't make the cut at the time, but I just wanted to emphasise and say that we've achieved, with the help of Councillor Reid and the Rail Trail Trust, that the rail trail has received a Heartland Ride status now, which is quite an accomplishment in terms of, gosh, how long have we been trying to get that?
Well, and that's what I wanted, why I've put up, because Andrew definitely needs a big thank you for all the work he's done over a period of time, and all the other staff members involved. I've still got some signage things to do, and sort of a route through Prebbleton, which, because NZTA had concerns about where it's going along Springs Road, but it's Andrew you have done a number of years, so thank you. Yeah.
Well, I'd also equally like to acknowledge the involvement of councillors past, present, and maybe future, in terms of getting us to this point and actually providing the liaison with the trust. And certainly Councillor Reid has done a lot of that in the last year or so, and just sort of making sure that the wheels are greased, as it were, in terms of what the trust needed to achieve and what we needed to achieve on their behalf to make this happen. So I appreciate it from my perspective. And that pretty much rounds out my section of the report. Sam?
Great, thanks. There's Max got a question as well. We're just wondering, the piece on the long-term plan where we went out to the community and said there's X number of projects over the next wee while, and then there's some longer-term projects, and we've basically kept that same plan. What does this change in funding mean for what the community can expect to see different than what we've just told them looked like it was going to happen last month?
Well, as I said before, the indicative funding approval that's been provided is for our maintenance renewal program. So it's basically road maintenance and road resealing and reconstruction and things like that. So it's not projects per se. And where the project aspect comes in is what we're still waiting for approval on, and that's through our low cost, low risk program, i.e. projects up to $2 million, plus all the projects over 2 million, which is pretty much those next two Prebbleton intersections. So basically we're still waiting to see what will come out of that. But as I said before, the emphasis, it seems to be, is on funding road safety as being the first priority, and that's how it's probably going to factor out in terms of where we see projects being approved or not.
Well, thank you. And yesterday, Chris Roberts, who's the Chief Executive of TIA, Tourism Industry Aotearoa, was here for the event Grant mentioned earlier. At lunchtime, I just asked him, he's also on, I think, the New Zealand Cycleways Trust, and so just talked to him about the right connections that we need to be able to get Arthur's Pass to Taumutu cycleway across the line, and he was quite excited about thinking how for Canterbury something might be able to be achieved there, and I'll have a discussion with you afterwards, Andrew, about how we continue to approach that topic, which is we've got some business case funding, I think, that we've just talked about doing, and making sure that we link up with the other agencies that are going to be required to get a successful outcome there. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, just thank you. I too would like to congratulate all those who've been involved with the Rail Trail Trust getting that status. Keeping the tyres pumped and the spokes tightened, a great outcome. Took a long while, but the outcome's great. Question I have for you, Andrew, is on page 680, where you talk about the street lighting upgrades to get a cost for the missing sections. once those costs are obtained, will they feed back into the next year's annual plan rather than being implemented in this financial year, this coming financial year?
Well, that would be my recommendation. I think we talked about at the time of the LTP deliberations that you may have wished to perhaps make an exception and fund them out of development contributions. But my recommendation would be that then it actually gets put through the next annual planning process and done that way.
Right, and that may involve a development contribution to catch up on the areas that are yet to be developed.
Yeah, and I'd have to warn you is that from the preliminary work that I've done on it, it could be a relatively expensive project because we also have to underground the overheads along Lincoln Ralston Road as well to make this work.
Right.
So we'll come back with you with the options and we can have a talk about it then.
Right. So it's just establishing that because there is, it's useful for the community to know that while we're getting prices, it's more likely to be a 2022-3 annual plan rather than this financial year.
Definitely, yeah.
Thank you.
Kia ora, guys. Thank you very much. I'm hoping it's appropriate enough to ask this question now. I'm just wondering, so on page 688, which is after where Mark's report is, but there's always the section every time this report comes that's about climate change considerations, and it always seems to say nothing directly applicable. And that does concern me a wee bit because we've got the Climate Change Commission reports now. We know that transport-related emissions are a huge part of what we need to change. And even in Auckland there, our LTP had a legal challenge because it didn't do anything to try to decrease transport-related emissions. So I'm just wondering, is there any way of knowing, or has any assessment been done across Canterbury or here to know whether or not we are supporting even just a decrease would be nice, but even just to stop it from increasing? Have we got our work targeted in the right direction in that regard, basically?
Yeah, I can start off by answering that question. The fact that the just adopted regional land transport plan is one of its headline targets is a 30% reduction in greenhouse gases. So there's an obligation, if you want to put it that way, on us all to try and meet that target. And I suppose we're all struggling in one way or another to work out how to best do that. But and certainly that aspect is being talked about all the time. And we've just recently put the finishing touches on a submission that's going by, is it the Mayoral Forum, through the RTC on net zero emissions. And so we're trying to get that message put through to the government around our priorities as a region around this aspect. But in terms of the work that needs to be done in this area, there's a huge amount of work that needs to be done to try and meet some of those objectives that we all have and are all really important.
I guess it would be quite nice to see that reflected somewhere in the report, so that it's, because it's something to be aware of. It's even got a section in there, and it just makes it look like we're just sort of poodling along and waiting to be told what to do. But I know you're not.
Yeah, I think the section on the report more reflects what this report is about as opposed to the activity that it's reported on, if that makes sense. But we'll include in the next report a copy of the submission so you can see what what's gone forward.
Thanks, Andrew. I was my request about the NZTA. I just want to thank you for the beautifully written letter to NZTA around state highway review. They can't help but fall for that. I think it's, I'm awaiting an affirmative answer very soon. But what I wanted to speak about was, you were saying that safety seems to be the main priority for Whakatahi now. I think Deborah, myself and Malcolm want to advise you that Gerald Street is extremely unsafe and needs moving up the horizon. I guess, just looking at that lighting upgrade on those Lincoln Wollaston Road, probably put a stake in the ground that I won't be voting for that before Lincoln Town Centre Master Plan gets approved. So it's squarely behind that, in my view.
Tēnā koutou. Just generally take the broad as read, but just a couple of things. It's still a lot of activity in corridor management.
just a few less audits, mainly due to staff sickness over the last month, but still a lot going out there and a lot of stuff to check on, as you all know, driving around, particularly around the fringes of Rolleston. But road maintenance renewals, yep, that's ongoing. And with the colder weather now, our unsealed roads aren't as good as they could be. They always get affected this time of year, as well as our network generally, the poor areas, there's potholes, things like that. So trying to work on that as much as we can. And then the unsealed road assessments, yeah, this is ongoing, and there's sort of a bit of a trend there. Sort of it's up and down a wee bit, bit of a change from last time, then they're a bit worse. I'd have to say that probably if we take it long enough and the funding keeps going the way it is, that'll start trending worse than what it is now, because I don't think we can sustain our unsealed network with the funding we've got at the moment, and that's the one that's not necessarily increasing very much. So that'll be an ongoing discussion, and it's not just us, it's everywhere. But speed limit review, so a bit of delay, get that out, mainly because staff's tied up in the rain event and things like that, but just working on the mapping for that at the moment. GS guys, and I'll have a yarn to the comms team in the next day or so, as I talked with Robin yesterday, so we should be getting into that. The other one that was added in, the heavy vehicle restrictions, has been asked for about restricting heavy vehicles. So this pretty much outlines what we can do. So it can be done through our traffic and parking bylaw if we want to go down that path of having restricting heavy vehicles and through on particular roads. So I've already got it in High Street, Leaston, but there's a good bypass there on State Street. So just a consideration, if you're not going to have traffic going on Springs Road, Pilton, on where they're actually going to go, or not on Gerald Street and Edward Street and Lincoln, on where they're actually going to go. So it can be done. It just will need a bit of work. But if you want to go down there, then we'll, I guess you'll ask for a report and get something in place and consult on it, and then see how we go. Be interesting on the heavy vehicles or road transport New Zealand, Road Trucking Association, sorry, to see their views on that as well, because it is vital that we have those links through those townships and different districts as well, parts of the district. So, and I think that was about it. But any questions on anything that's written on there, that's fine.
Thank you. I am concerned about the heavy vehicle bypass. Under matters and investigation, we have staff would report on possible solutions. But in your report, you're saying that you're asking us to propose, or somebody to propose, alternate heavy vehicle routes. I would have thought that you'd have brought back alternate routes. Here in Rolleston, it's quite easy to see. If we want to take heavy vehicles off Tennyson Street between Rolleston Drive and Kidman Street, the answer is Rolleston Drive. To simply have the heavy vehicles, instead of transitioning up Tennyson Street through our new town centre to the state highway, that they be directed to turn either left or right onto Rolleston Drive to proceed to the state highway. It is quite obvious. I agree, Prebbleton is a bit more problematic, but with the new roundabouts being installed, surely the long-term solution for Prebbleton is Shands Road. And Lincoln, again, that's actually probably the most problematic, would be the heavy vehicle bypass, because there isn't an obvious one. But again, it is to suggest that if they're not, a lot of the heavy vehicles should be on Shands Road. They shouldn't be continuing through Prebbleton and ending up on Birches Road, then Springs Road. They should be using Shands Road. So certainly in Rolleston, I think the answer is obvious, and I would have liked to see the consultation on that now, because I think as we develop our town centre, it's not attractive when you see heavy vehicles transitioning, even though they may obey the 30k speed limit, going through our new town centre. It's not what we want. And there are clear alternatives available today. The other two townships, I would support the ward councillors in seeking at least signage, if not a bylaw, recommending that heavy vehicles take alternate routes.
Yeah, thanks for the report. And I second what Mark has said about Tennyson Street particularly, and I had raised before about when I'm biking up there, it's actually quite narrow as well to keep the speed down. It's not really appropriate for heavy vehicles, big vehicles, because they are too big unless they actually need to be there to be bringing construction material for what is going in there. Now, I've just seen yesterday that Wakakotahi is consulting on speed limits from Christchurch to Akaroa, I'm just wondering whether they've been speaking to us or about that, because obviously it goes through some of our district. And will we be putting in a submission to that?
They've sent a link through saying that they're consulting on it, so yes, they've notified us. So I'm sure we'll be putting a submission in. So.
So they haven't spoken to us directly asking if we have any opinions, because it was something that when I was the chair of the Road Safety Committee when we had it last term, it was definitely the speed limits going into Taitapu. I don't know if there's anything's changed in that regard, but I did email David Scarlett from NZTA back then about it, and I'm not aware of anything being done since then.
Credit where it's due. NZTA have done some substantive work on speed limits in Taitapu, moved the signage out further from the village and put larger scale, big signage in place. The key issue is still the intersection, commonly known as the intersection at the store, where large SUVs and such like park on the corner, and visibility is very obscured, and there's a high near miss rate if you're using health and safety language. It's still a problem. If you want an example of the speeds people do on the road, go to YouTube and you'll see a motorcyclist who decides to race all the way from Taitapu to Mayoral and does it in a very, very short time. So there's a significant speeding and significant safety issues. I don't think putting a different speed limit is going to change it, because it's just driver behaviour.
The key part in that request in the email so far acknowledges that Christchurch Akaroa is one of the top 10% in New Zealand where safer speeds will result in a greater reduction in deaths and serious injuries. The key things they want to hear are there places that are hard to get from and to, how safe do you feel crossing the highway and let your children walk or cycle across to school? Is extra signage needed? How can visibility be improved? To your point, Gareth, just said, could speed limits be extended or reduced in places, and is there anything else? So we will be making a submission on that if there's interested councillors, and the two of you have highlighted today, perhaps to work with staff on those key points.
Yeah, we've asked consistently for a foot access on the bridge, and haven't been able to achieve that, and the lowering of the concrete size and stuff.
We're not going to formally note that that'll happen, but Mark, whoever's writing the submission to work with those two councillors. Great. Shane and Deborah.
Tēnā kōrua, thank you very much, Andrew Muck, for your report. I guess since I've been a councillor, and probably a little bit of time before that, what I've seen is an extravagant amount of traffic using Leaston Lake Road. Not only Leaston Lake Road, Leaston Road as an arterial route, including heavy vehicles. We've seen that through our towns, and it's been a concern from our constituents for a number of years now, and they continually contact me. Given the recent state emergency, a number of those arterial routes are put under pressure, including Leaston Lake Road out to Dunsandel, which caused a number of other issues out on the main road. They got an absolute hammering, and you well know that, you're the expert, and everybody had to slow down to 80, but what we saw was a township and further townships of 4,500 to 5,000 people all sort of backed up on these arterial roads and given them a good hammering. Here you've page 684, the heavy vehicle bypass. There's been concern over that bypass for a number of years now, which constituents also contact me about possible upgrading and signing, and we spoke about education, about using that. We're still seeing a number of trucks actually barrelling down the main street, and that intersection in general, we've spoken about that, and there's some analysis going on about on that particular intersection. We've had near misses, we've had accidents happen on that particular intersection, and given the recent predicted growth, I would be really pleased to see within the council request section here that intersection in particular is included, and I guess an analysis moving forward. These are some of the concerns from our constituents that contact me, and I would really appreciate feedback. So I guess backtracking to the letter, I would also like, if it is possible, if there's agreement around the table here, that Leaston Road is also considered in your letter as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Shane. We'll wait till we hear back before identifying anything further roads, but it'll be noted. Thank you. Deborah, and welcome.
Thanks, Shane. I'm going to follow on from you with regards to Leaston Road. I guess, sorry, but this seems to be a hardy annual with regards to Springston and a traffic calming device. I was at a meeting recently and they understand that they've purchased the device and it used to be up in Leaston Road, and they want to know why it can't be reinstated on Leaston Road where it was before if they've purchased it. And they also asked about the progress on 2 other sites for putting the traffic calming, one along both ends of Ellesmere Junction Road. Is there an update you can give, please?
Haven't got information back from Kinetics yet, but we're chasing them up. The reason why that we haven't put it back up on Leaston Road is because while it was installed there previously, it was without the permission of Orion at the time, who now know it's going to go there and needed assessed along with the other ones on Ellesmere Junction Road. So all 3 sites are being assessed at the moment.
Is there a time frame on Kinetics?
We haven't got one. No, but it should have had something back by now, so we'll chase them up.
Thank you.
Oh, it's okay. Yes, please. Thank you. Just secondary to that, just before we extrapolate that information, the reason I brought this up is because of the dangerous situation we have in Prebbleton. So I think retrospectively looking at that now, we need to future plan for the development that is happening in Leaston, so we don't have to go back and fix it. Thank you.
Yeah, Mark, thanks for the report, Andrew. Prebbleton Township is drowning in traffic at the moment. Shands Road's closed one way. Everybody coming south is now coming through Springs Road. There's a tailback from the top of the motorway bridge to the township, starting at about 4:30 every afternoon. Ellesmere Transport and other large transport companies seem to use Springs Road as preferred method of getting to Christchurch City with their bulk bins full of grain. Some of those drivers like the sound of their exhaust brakes. Quite frankly, I hear them coming. I could probably tell you which truck and the registration plate of the truck. They like blipping it as they go through the gears, and they're in a community of 4,000 people, and to me it's untenable. There's absolutely no reason for them supposedly doing 50 kilometres an hour to need to use exhaust brakes in a township with a fully laden vehicle. I would love to see a bypass. I'd love to see them using Shands Road, and I guess as the work that Andrew's been doing, and we've been working in concert over the years to look at improvements and roundabouts, we may well see that. But in the meantime, if there's anything we can do, whether it be signage or whatever, to do something about the use of exhaust brakes would help some of the people in the community who are getting a bit agitated. Thank you.
Yeah, I had to contact New Zealand Trucking Association about it. They said it is a hardy annual for them throughout the country, and that they get requests about it all the time. But they were going to work on putting out to their members about, just be considerate of residents and townships that while engine brakes are vital for safety of driving the trucks, they don't have to be used driving along Springs Road in Prebbleton at under 50 kilometres an hour. So that was something they've got to go. I haven't heard back from them yet, but I'll follow up with that again. Putting up a sign with please no engine brakes or something like that, rather than actually having it as something that's regulatory, just asking for the cooperation, because that's all it really is, just get drivers to think, if you were living here, would you like to have the engine brakes go in? Being drivers, they may well like it, but yeah.
Thank you. Final question, Bob.
Yeah, just on the undergrounding of the wiring for lighting in tunnel, is there any funding for that? Is it going ahead, or what? I've been asked quite a lot lately on what was actually happening.
That's a very good question, because I know it was discussed at the LTP deliberations, and it's sort of, to be honest with you, flown under my radar. I don't know about Mark's, but as I understood it, it was something that you still as a council wanted to do, but we had always that continuing problem with the agreement that had been made with those people not to do that work and to install those streetlights.
I have a different opinion, because I understood there were some streetlights that were put in, which were just commissioned for those people. But the piece that they want done is the finishing Glen Tunnel, which is the other half of it, which is way away from these people. So I didn't see that the two were related. It was just, people are asking.
Yeah, no, fair point. Can I have a talk to you a bit more about it and just get it nailed down, and then we can work out a plan from there? Because we may be able to utilise, for instance, our undergrounding funding account to help with that. Yeah.
and it's just been noted that's one of the action points from the long-term plan, so that'll be good to see that follow-up done. Just wondering about the recommendation that we have. So there's received a report, but just the conversation around identifying routes and heavy traffic on 3 particular roads, Tennyson, Springs and Gerald Street. And whether we have a B that says request staff to work with councillors, community and road user groups, including New Zealand Trucking Association, to identify measures to reduce heavy vehicles on Tennyson Street, Springs Road, Prebbleton and Gerald Street, Lincoln. And whether that captures what councillors are wanting to see done, and then gives Mark enough direction to say, how do we come up with a plan around what the next step looks like? Mark?
Well, yeah. My wording in the report wasn't to say, I want you to come up with alternative routes. The decision needs to be made. You want to make this street, for example, Tennyson Street, no heavy vehicles. Therefore, adopt that or make that decision, and then we can go out alternative routes and actually put that in place. I wasn't saying just come up with alternative routes. I was saying if you want to agree that no heavy vehicles on Springs Road or Tennyson Street or whatever, then we can make that decision, and then work on the plan on how we deal with that, how we sign it, how we get approved, and what the alternative routes are, and then go from there. That was my intention, but yeah.
Let's work with that.
So it's similar to what you're asking for, but it's more about the decision on make this no heavy vehicles on the street, and then work on a plan on how to get there.
But to make that decision, it'd be helpful to have maps. So like next month, to have maps of exactly the area that we're talking about and the space, and then think about how we engage the other groups around making what that final decision is going to look like. Mark?
Well, actually, I think that we know exactly with respect to Tennyson Street. There's no need for a map. We're talking about one block. We're talking about between Ralston Drive and Kidman Street. I understand that there's a need for a greater consideration in Lincoln and Prebbleton, but I'd like to see that the recommendation is that B, council seeks a restriction on heavy vehicle use of Tennyson Street between Ralston Drive and Kidman Street, and C works towards a similar restriction in Springs Road, Prebbleton and Gerald Street, Lincoln. Because I don't think we need maps for the Ralston piece. It's pretty clear. It's where our town centre is. There are immediate alternate routes. I was hoping this would be actually going out at the same time we were doing the speed limit consultation, that we'd be asking our community, do you support this for Ralston? Because it isn't rocket science. It doesn't need a map. It's one block, well, one large block, depending whether you count the side streets. It's pretty clear that we want no heavy traffic except for those doing deliveries in that piece of Tennyson Street. I don't believe it's another month.
Any other comments around Grant?
I hear where you're coming from, Mark, but before I make a decision which is irreversible, I'd like some advice from our team as to what type of vehicles does it affect the delivery routes to the supermarket, construction, all those kind of things. I mean, making a snap decision on even without a map to me sounds like a poor process.
Yeah, and I would echo that, because we're about to go through construction of Rolleston Town Centre Master Plan, which will not go ahead if you don't allow heavy vehicles to carry materials down there. And secondly, there are a number of businesses in that area that rely on heavy vehicles and inverted commas for daily delivery. So I don't think that would be prudent to do that.
With all due respect, twaddle, heavy vehicle restrictions do not ban heavy vehicles doing deliveries. No heavy vehicle restriction does that. A heavy vehicle restriction is on those vehicles passing through the area with no good purpose to be there. So a heavy vehicle restriction on Tennyson Street doesn't say that you can't do a delivery to any of those stores. It doesn't say you can't deliver construction material to those building sites. What it says is, if you're a stock truck and trailer transitioning up Tennyson Street, you don't drive between Ralston Drive and Kidman Street. There is no need for it. If you go to the state highway, you either turn left or right. You don't transition through that piece of Tennyson Street.
Okay, I think we're going to end up in danger of arguing about something that you all want to see and agree on. It's just really about a timing piece. So rather than drag this piece on, I just think Mark understood exactly the direction that we wanted to go, and in 4 weeks' time, we're going to receive a report with more information and the ability to make an informed decision that we can all support along the lines of what you've written there, Mark. But I just think sort of the extra month will actually get to come up with a far better outcome. So I'm suggesting we just leave it with we receive the report, and Mark understands the commentary that's here. If you'd like to move that B happens there, you're welcome to move it and see if there's a second of it. Okay, thank you. So I'll move that we receive the report, and seconder Lemon. Any further discussion? All those in favour say aye. Against, declare it carried. Thank you, Andrew and Mark. And we're just going to extend the meeting beyond the time, because it'll just be good to finish off Douglas's report. So mover and seconder for extension of the meeting, Ebihara and Lyle. Any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Against, declare it carried. And Douglas, I invite you to the front of the room. We move on to report tab 16. It's the property transaction update on page 692.
Good afternoon. Just apologise. Yeah, just as I was enjoying the debate you were having on.
While Douglas gets ready, I'll move that we receive his report.
Okay, hopefully you've all had a chance to see the new extension. I've certainly enjoyed the swimming in it. So yeah, great what's happened there at the Aquatic Centre. And you'll just see there's a bit of a program of works occurring over the next 3 to 4 weeks to sort of complete further dry space work. And then we've just got the main pool, what was the main pool, to turn more into a more learn to swim family type pool. So yeah, projects moving on nicely.
Yeah, no, I second that pool is looking really good, and it's good to see that the other work going on. But just, do you have an actual date of when the female changing rooms are opening? Or just they are very important.
Yeah, I think second.
It's not that I have a vested interest.
We'll get an answer for you, Douglas.
Yeah, I think it's 2nd of July. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you, Shane.
Kia ora, Douglas. Miharo, amazing.
Kia ora. Te ara atia.
Yeah, so the project is proceeding well. Certainly the on-site, there's a lot of, if you drive past on any day, there's a lot of vehicles indicating a lot of activity that is just consistently going on the site. But we're certainly happy with where Te Ara's progress is at. It's going to be, we'll be pushing obviously right to the end as the combined team of contractors and council and designers. But, you know, we're seeing that 24th of August, there's a key milestone, as we state in the report, and then obviously heading for that 20th of November official opening date. But yeah, a lot of complexity, but a lot of work, and we keep having programming weekly meetings with contractors and designers, and that's important just to make sure everyone's working in tandem. And certainly that is the process we're seeing.
Thank you. Selwyn Sports Centre.
Been a bit of an issue there in the rain event. We've explained what the issue was. It's obviously been dealt with by the builder. It was affecting a quarter and a half there. Not obviously acceptable, but has been reasonably easy to resolve, I suppose. And then that issue with the roller door, which I haven't heard how that's been implemented yet.
Sam, you stepped over Te Ara Atia, surrounds Century Garden and Town Square. So I had a question as to whether the recent weather has made any delay in the development there.
Well, not led to believe there's any issues. Dylan Robinson, who takes the lead on that on the ground for us, is on there every 2 days, and he's not seeing anything of concern. So, I mean, it is one of the advantages of having more of that gravelly ground underneath. It does drain away really well. So.
Cool, thank you. Responsible camping.
So, we've not formally heard an answer yet, but we just happened to be standing beside a man who had a lot to do with these applications, and I reckon we were looking good. But well, time will tell. So
it was good to have his feedback, Douglas, where he said that we were able to provide everything that they needed to answer the question and make a decision. And that's just good feedback for you and staff for the work that does go into these applications. As councillors, we know there's nothing worse than maybe even wanting to support something or feeling like there's an application before you that seems like it might be okay, but without the right information to make a proper decision, and that just holds everything up. So well done to you and your team, regardless of the outcome there. Lisa, Medical Centre Library. Anything new?
No, nothing really new on that. Can I just put us? I mean, now that we're sort of a long-term plan adopter, we are obviously pushing in with a few meetings and programming. There's a lot of programming on this project and the leasing project in general, but we'll take a second on the Hororata project.
Yep.
I think it would be very helpful, and I look to perhaps the ward councillors maybe, but we need to make a list of things about this project that we need to focus on or be asked to focus on the staff. So probably, if ward council in particular, but I'm going to seek some perhaps members who might be interested in just sitting down, because there are a few things we've got to go through as part of the submissions and just unpack where we go with this project, and then engage back with Go Hororata. So if anyone wants to be part of that next step, please would welcome that. It is also linked to this heritage process we need to follow on the hall too, because they are all, we've just got to pick through and get the right answer as we work out what are we going to do with this project. So yeah, anyone who wants to be involved in a bit of a think tank over the next few weeks, if you drop me an email for me, it can be really useful.
Douglas, on that, I don't want to reinvent the wheel, and LTP discussions were pretty clear that we're progressing with option one. We're not doing anything about the hall, and it's a new build on the reserve at the 3 million. It's obviously going to be subject to the work that the trust have done and their contributions to that, but that's our starting point, and I don't want to muddy what the outcome for Hororata looks like around the old hall site. Anything else, I think we've clearly said where we want to go, and so if other councillors do want to be involved, great, but let's be really clear with where we are currently, and let's re-engage with the trust who requested that when they were here with us to get that answer. So if there's extra clarity required, let's make sure we're really clear with that.
Okay, I hear that. I suppose I just want to make sure that existing building where everyone understands clearly where that stands to going forward, because it's like you say, we're sitting and leaving it and shutting it effectively unless someone wants to take it over. So just need to understand. Yeah, that's okay.
Well, it's part of the sale process at the moment, and that's money that will go towards the hall. And if someone else in the community wants to come up with the 400,000 or whatever's been indicated, then that's there. Otherwise, it's a completely separate process to me around that hall future, rather than getting the new facility on the reserve. I've seen nods around the table, so I think that's where we landed.
Okay, makes my job easier. That's cool.
And I'm happy to be involved in those discussions, Douglas, with you, and Bob and Jenny have obviously been involved, but if someone outside would like to as well. Yes.
Right, look, to be fair, based on your comment, Your Worship, in the council, I won't be going near that part of the project with too much interest now. We'll just move on to the new bit, so that's fine.
Good.
It's great, just really a comment there on me. It's one of our projects for this coming year, and just a bit of a commentary there regarding the Kiwi position, which isn't funded, but we'll just work through and to see if we can allocate funding over the next couple of years. And then just a comment recently on the Leafs and Rifle Range building behind the rugby club building, which it's not needing to be closed, but definitely it does not have a future unless it's significantly strengthened.
Anything on its own Kiwi as well?
Well, Kiwi, we'll just have, there are no issues with keeping Kiwi open, but we just have that 15 years to work through. What we're looking at is around just under 100,000 to do that strengthening methodology. So halfway through this year, we'll just look to see what our budgets are available. I think what we'll do is we'll definitely get on with design and getting consenting ready, because that's the reasonably straightforward part of that process. It's just we need to get that done so we understand what our final cost is, but then we'll just need to see how we fund it.
Great. West Malcolm Community Park?
West Malcolm, as it is, so much more I can add there. We've done quite a bit of work
Reed's Pit is pretty well ready to go. Just probably with a bit of an update and public spirit on land issues would be useful. In Prebbleton, we've had it's got a lot of interest publicly on the pump track there. We've had some on the ground consultation processes there. We've assessed the feedback. There's certainly, from what we can see, strong support in the community for more of perhaps a sort of family more based type design. That aside, we can put some more complexity in some parts of the design, which will give a greater challenge for those who want to be pushed a bit. But there is, a desire for a track that is more meets a wider range of users than maybe those who are technically looking for a challenge. Prebbleton, the new park there in Birches Road. So we're now proceeding to get our tender documentation ready. So there'll be a significant amount of work undertaken now over the next couple of years, in particular my long-term plans. So that's all going well. And then an update there on where our gravel pit leasing is. The vehicle issue hasn't advanced this month. That's the end of that report, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Muller.
So, could you give me some clarity around the vehicle replacement program? I'm just not sure that I'm quite clear on where we're going with this. Just giving you my take from what I thought the councillors were asking for was sort of an immediate plunge into the world of EV or close to it. Just is the current replacement program looking like it will be conventionally powered this 21-22 period, or are we likely to see either through transport as a service, you contracting a vehicle in from outside, or is it what is it likely to look like? I'm just not quite sure what's being supposed to be delivered to us.
I think the key outcome we would be saying is that we're obviously the day of needing as many utes as we run in our fleet is over, and we'll need to be replacing those. And we would be probably prior to the government announcement, a week ago, we would have been going more down the hybrid argument for our fleet replacement. I'm not too sure exactly whether we fit under the full EV program. If we do, then we can certainly start to be looking at that. Our main issue, and it's improving all the time, is just getting that length of number of Ks available to us day in, day out. I think the key point was that we weren't looking to accelerate our replacement program. We were just looking to make sure that as that comes up, we move into more that hybrid and then start looking at the EV for our fleets.
Just a supplementary question, does our e-road data suggest that range is an issue for us? Because I would have thought there wouldn't be hardly any vehicles in our fleet which have range compromise.
Oh, good point. I mean, the average kilometre travel, do we say, is only 16,000. A lot of our vehicles only travel under 10,000. There's probably maybe about 8 or 9 that would travel anywhere now around over 30,000 a year. So yes, you're right. We haven't got an interpreted day by day. We haven't done that sort of work. But I suppose the question is, as I say, the world changed about a week ago when the government policy changed. If we think we'd just be going straight to full EV as opposed to a hybrid EV mix, then we'll move in that direction.
Yeah, I think that is the direction that we've said we would like to go. The timing that you've got here is, as you've said, we weren't necessarily looking to accelerate what's there, but as they come up for replacement, EV should be the first thing that gets ticked off.
Yeah, okay, so that's fine. We'll head down more. We'll try down a pure EV, but as we say, consistent with that. Although I do accept the comment that utes might have some more attractiveness to move those through our fleet faster because of the media commentary regarding the attractiveness of our type of combustible ute for others in the future.
And I don't know what sits outside 5 years, but I would kind of assume that we'd be making this transition over 5 years. So whatever's in 6 through 10, that needs to be compressed back in. I don't know what those numbers are because they're not here for us, but maybe that's part of the update for the July meeting.
That's not hard to do. But the big fear, as I say, most of our fleet, which we run on a 2,000k replacement for a 5 year, we've pushed out to the 200k as our rule at the moment, mainly because our vehicles generally will last well beyond 5 years. So we've taken that sort of, I suppose, push the asset harder because it can be pushed harder.
can we request what the 5-year replacement process is going to be for our vehicle fleet?
Which it's reasonably simple, Your Worship. If you take those vehicles there, there's about 23, there's 30 vehicles there. We would just bring the last 25 vehicles into year 5 if you want to do everything within a 5-year program.
Councillors, does it fit what your expectations would look like? I think probably leaving the big bulk out at year 5 might not be quite the right thing to do. And doing things sooner the better. But
yeah, but I think, come back to Douglas's earlier point, I think the review of the types of vehicles has got to be undertaken first. Then we look at availability on the market. I mean, we're already hearing about supply issues. Interestingly, the guy that spoke to us yesterday said his car was ordered offshore in January and still hasn't arrived. So
I think, well, that's the reason why I think we need to make, well, I think we have made the decision that we'd like to see this done, and the first purchases need to be completed in the next month so that we can actually have them in the next financial year, or the current financial year, until to go for July. Otherwise, we're not going to see them in our fleet. So there'll be no change because we'll still be burning the diesel that we're currently burning now. What do councillors need to have certainty around where we're going here, because it's feeling a bit loose? Yeah, Alexander?
I support your intent. I believe that our desire was that we would transition sooner than later, but I would caution that with we need to get the value out of the vehicles we've currently got. In terms of, there's no point replacing a vehicle when the equivalent is no better. So, you know, I think we should transition as soon as we can to EVs. I don't believe that range anxiety for our staff is actually as bad as it has been. With the new charging stations throughout our district, particularly on the state highways, there is opportunity for staff to break their journeys if they really had to and charge. There's more of an issue of a lack of charging facilities here in the compound that needs to be addressed. But yes, I agree that we need to start ordering vehicles now for delivery in the next financial year.
And well, 10 minutes to put 100 k's on a new EV now, so the charging time isn't a big deal. Deborah and Sophie.
Yes, I agree with Mark and what's been said. However, if the EVs aren't available, I think hybrids have been out for a long, long time, and I think we should have transitioned to hybrids. That should be at least a goal if we can't get the direct EVs. And hybrids do come in 4-wheel drives. Oh.
Yeah, thank you. Sophie?
Yeah, I agree with most of what's been said. I guess one point is that we have no idea what we're going to be directed to do by government over the next 5 years anyway, and what kind of incentives they're going to put on us to, or requirements to you know, make these changes anyway. So the more planning we've got, the better, obviously. It would be good to have more analysis of our trip data, to be honest, because it is known that New Zealanders make a lot of very short trips in cars that could be done by other means. We do have little e-bikes. We probably car share more often. You know, if you're just going down to the library, you don't need to hop in a car to do it. So do we actually need as many vehicles as we've got? You know, I don't think we know that. I don't know how many trips could actually be annihilated, you know, in a vehicle, as you know. So.
Yeah, that's what maybe what I could suggest is the next year, 21-22, we need to obviously make some decisions and make some orders. But what I think you're saying to me is take the balance of your fleet replacement beyond June 26 and bring that into, say, the next 4 years. So that way, by June 26, we've got our full fleet. Predominantly, we're aiming to be in EV, yes, but there may be some hybrid there, just depending on fit-for-purpose vehicles in there. The comment about small, we could spend quite a bit of time analysing all those trips, but probably not actually achieve a simplistic answer. I mean, I know I look out some days at our compound and it's totally empty. There are fewer, though, than days when you see the compound still with a few vehicles in it. So it is an everlasting challenge, and we actually often bring vehicles across in peak summer period to supplement our fleet. so we do have slings and roundabouts. I think the key thing is we're just trying to encourage, and we can look for those type of trips where, yeah, for argument's sake, a vehicle going between HQ and TRRT would be plainly not appropriate, and that's a walk. So we'll look to try and knock those ones out. Those visits and trips, they will be reasonably minor, I'd have to say. But yeah, we'll just try and work on that basis. So if you need a resolution, Your Worship, maybe that's the way to go. Give us the instruction to have the fleet fully EV/hybrid with a preference for EV by 30 June 2026.
Yep, you got that, Naomi?
Can I just add a point just for clarity around rebate? Plug-in hybrids are fully included in the rebate. So a rush straight to electric may not be quite appropriate for some of our fleet. And noting that there's only around about 14,000 EVs currently in ownership in New Zealand, so it's very, very small, and getting the right sort of vehicles for us will take time.
Yep. Thank you.
Perhaps the wording, Sam, should be more that council works towards having our fully EV fleet by the 30th of June 2026. Because as Kelvin has said, it's maybe difficult to actually achieve. And as mover of the motion, I think something like that gives a clear signal of our intent that acknowledges that there may be reasons why we don't achieve that.
Yep. Grant?
Yeah, I wasn't suggesting, I mean, that's great, we're enthusiastic and we want to get holes, but the measured asset renewal program was what I was after, transitioning to electric, and I'm not sure 25, 26. I mean, we haven't even discussed the budget implications of doing that because it could severely blow our budget out of the water. So why don't we give Douglas a wee bit of time and his team just to do a bit of analysis about what the budget implications of that might be. But what I was intending to do was set the message that as we renew our fleet, we should be, aiming towards EV. And if, as Calvin says, we need the odd one or two, which is hybrid, which manages to go up to others parts, that's fine. But the majority of our fleet, I think if we analyse our fleet usage, there would be very few vehicles that do over 300 kilometres a day. I don't know the answer to that.
Thanks, Grant. I think what we've got here is what we've sort of been talking about the last few months anyway. And if there's restrictions on budgets, then that can be an annual plan matter. You've already got vehicle replacements scheduled for this year. And if we do end up selling the Hiluxes, or when we end up selling them, we're going to earn what we paid for them in the first place. There's no loss of value in our Hiluxes when we buy them at the all government rate to begin with. So I appreciate the conversation that we've had so far, and I think we're landing on a clear direction for staff. David? Thanks, Mark, for moving that. Seconder? Shane? All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Declare it carried. Thanks, Douglas. We'll move into PX. Mover Shane, seconded Nicole. All those in favour say aye. Against? Declare it carried. And we'll break